I'm George غالاوي, and I present كلمة on Al Mayadeen television. Here we are in London. I speak my words freely, either in Parliament, on television, here on the streets of London. كلمة means free word. That's what I speak. So كلمة is a two-way conversation. Check it out on Al Mayadeen television. Welcome to كلمة with me, George غالاوي, on Al Mayadeen television, coming to you from London, but discussing the Middle East and North Africa, in particular Libya, because it is 5 years ago that those geniuses, David Cameron, Nicolas Sarkozy, and President Barack Obama, decided that it would be a good idea to become Al-Qaeda's air force in the skies over Libya, to abuse the United Nations and the trust of the other members of the Security Council of the United Nations into voting for a no-fly zone that became a plenty-fly zone, a plenty-fly and bomb zone, which destroyed much of the infrastructure, actual and political, of Libya and led to the horror story that is Libya today. Now, unlike some, including perhaps in this audience, I was never a fan of Colonel Gaddafi. I never met him, I never supported him, and he never supported me. But I'll tell you something of which I am sure. Libya is 10 times worse off today after the NATO destruction of the Libyan state than it was under Colonel Gaddafi. It's part of a pattern, of course, starting back in Afghanistan in the 1980s. We could go much further back, but let's start with Afghanistan in the 1980s, when Western countries and NATO, the United Kingdom, the United States, France, took the view that my enemy's enemy is my friend, even if your enemy's enemy is even worse than your enemy. And in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Syria, in Libya, in Yemen, and in many other places, this strategy is still being employed, and always with the same results. Which makes you wonder, are we led by fools or knaves? Knaves is an old English word, so let me further define it. Are we led by fools or by rogues? And which would be worse? I'm really not sure. I constantly change my mind about that. But whether they're fools or whether they are knaves, they are responsible for a series of blunders and crimes which are sending fanatic extremism, heart-eating, head-chopping, crucifying extremism everywhere in the globe. In Libya, today, several groups of fanatic extremists are fighting each other for power, supported by one or other of the Western satrapies in the Persian Gulf. These extremist groups are effectively indistinguishable except to the very trained eye. They all believe in their own brand of sectarianism and extremism to the exclusion of everyone else. Now, Western policy was very clear when David Cameron and Sarkozy went to Benghazi and declared peace, freedom, liberty, and democracy in Libya. If you didn't want to cry, you really would have to laugh, because, of course, none of these things has come to pass or is likely to come to pass for 5, 10, 15, 20, maybe 50 years. And instead of one Libya, we now have many Libyas. I've lost count. Some of the distinguished expert in the audience will perhaps be able to bring me up to speed. I'm not a specialist on Libya, but it's very clear that instead of one state, we now have several emirates that cannot be described as states. And one thing is certain, they sure as eggs cannot control the Libyan borders. Neither the land borders nor, and this is of rather important measure for European peoples, the coastal border either. Libya is now a gigantic open gate for boatloads of refugees fleeing poverty, war, and oppression, with absolutely no one to stop them. A highly developed trade in people trafficking has led to hundreds of thousands of refugees coming across the Mediterranean through that now wide open door. Of course, many of them never arrive, but go to a watery grave in the sea, and no one can apparently do anything to bring it under control. So, I have this audience of distinguished experts, one or two enthusiastic amateurs like myself, and we're going to discuss this evening with our free words, our kalima hurra, what has been achieved by 5 years of NATO-sponsored revolution in Libya. Who's going to speak first? Yes, the lady in the middle.
Hi, George. My name is Zahra Sabaiti. My question is, as we know that the West has allowed ISIS to take over the city of Sirte. This happened recently. Was this an excuse for the West to intervene? And if they do, will it create any stability, do you think? Also, another question is, so what stance should the Libyan people have? What stance should they take regarding this matter?
Well, a very significant number of ISIS terrorists have relocated to Libya. That much is clear. And they did establish quite a formidable base in Sirte, which is ironic, which is, of course, the former heartland of Gaddafi. By the time this program goes out, ISIS will have been defeated in Sirte, but they will merely have moved elsewhere. They will morph, perhaps, they will certainly regroup, and they will diffuse amongst the population, adding to the general level of murder and mayhem and chaos in what was once a very rich oil-producing Mediterranean power. It's not for me to tell the Libyan people what they should do, but my general stance on Libya is, as it is on all Arab countries, that the first priority is to be a country, to be a state, to be one. Who else would like to make a contribution? 2 women in a row. Excellent. That's how I like the shows to be. Go ahead, madam.
Hello, George. My name is Batul Sabaiti. I've got 2 questions. My first question is, do you think that the initial intervention of the West in Libya in order to get rid of Gaddafi, do you think that this has paved way, or rather do you think that it was planned, that specific event planned for the current interventions that are taking place, whether it be the French in Benghazi or whether it be the Americans in Sirte, or rather do you think that the current interventions are taking place in order to eliminate the unwanted expansion of ISIS in the region? Because of course ISIS now is become undefeated. I mean, it's uncontrollable. That's my first question. And my second question is, do you think it's quite dangerous for Europe to really provide the optimum conditions for terrorism to take place in Libya, given that it's so geographically close to Europe? So there's always that.
Well, on your first question first, you're giving the Western leaders far too much credit. The Western leaders are not James Bonds. They're more Austin Powers or Mr. Bean. They are bumbling idiots who bumble from one disaster after another. The idea that they planned one intervention so that they could later make a second intervention and so on gives them far too much credit. It assumes they have a plan. They don't have a plan. beyond the plan to keep the Arabs divided and weak, the better to steal their things and the better to protect their illegitimate child, Israel. That's the only plan that they have. On the tactical level, they have no plans at all. The Western attitude to terrorism is completely schizophrenic. I'm not a psychologist, but I recognize a schizophrenic when I see it. This schizophrenic policy seeks to terrify our own populations with the danger of terrorism, banning burkinis on the south coast of France, whilst arming and financing and giving diplomatic and political support to actual terrorists in the region. If you cut someone's head off in France, you are a despicable, mutilating beast and terrorist. But if you cut someone's head off in Syria, we'll give you the knife and we'll pay you the money to keep your army of head cutters going. In fact, this literally became true when a French priest, may God rest his soul, was decapitated in Rouen in France by the very same people who decapitated many priests, even bishops, in Syria. The difference being, we shot dead the terrorist in France and we gave weapons to the terrorists in Syria. There's a book written long ago. Someone as of such tender years as you may not have read it. It was written by a woman from the same city as me in Scotland. Her name was Mary Shelley. And her book was Frankenstein, a modern Prometheus. The story is that a doctor decides, Dr. Frankenstein, decides to make a monster. But by the time he's finished the monster, it has broken free of his control and is rampaging everywhere, including in his own house and in his own laboratory. The moral of the story being, it's called a monster for a reason. And when you've built it, you no more control it. And that's what we have been doing since the 1980s with the monster of this fanatic extremism of which I speak. Yes, gentleman in the front row.
My name is Dr. Abdulaziz Doua. I am a Libyan broadcaster and Libyan commentators. I would like to add and answer some of your audience question as an expert. They call and they try to speak about the ISIS insert. Do you know the geographic or the length of the area where is the ISIS insert? It's just less than 1 mile equal another 1 mile. So it's very tight, small place. The real ISIS, not insert. The real ISIS, we call it ISIS with tie and suit, sitting in Tripoli. They have connections with the British embassy, ambassadors, and other Western ambassadors, either from Italy, France, Germany, or United States. The real problem for the Libyans is actually the continuous of the Western intervention until now. As a Libyan nationalist, we realize what things has been delivered or the market to the ordinary Libyan. There's no revolution called anymore in Libya for the 17th of February. There is no, it's a chaos has been implanted in Libya, and they now, the ordinary Libyan, they try to defeat it, but because they couldn't defeat it because the Western still support the same fanatics groups that are controlling things. So they are actually manipulated, and they try to manage all this chaotic in Libya. Not for Libya only, for the whole region. actually targeting Algeria, and they're targeting the National Army of Egypt. Also, the example of Libya, they give them a new called fourth generation of the war, is you give a weapon, you stay away and let people kill each other. And that's what happened when they went in the third generation, their war of intervention in Afghanistan and in Iraq. They sent soldiers and they sent equipment. It's very costly. But now in Libya, they realize that if you just supply them with their differences, a little political support and weapons, they will kill each other. They used to plan these things to interfere in Syria, not anymore. After the example of Libya has successful in their eyes, not for the Libyan eyes, that's why they continue the problem in Syria. So they just drew them the weapon, few of money, and just try to invite them to the table of negotiation. After what? After what the case had happened.
That's true, Doctor, that the lesson has been learned from Iraq, that invading Arab countries with hundreds of thousands of Western soldiers leads to unacceptably high political costs in the countries that send the soldiers. I don't myself believe that that will ever happen again, though you should never say never in politics. But they have discovered that it's extremely easy to get Muslims to murder each other, to get Arabs to murder each other. And all you have to do is to drop the weapons, the money, the political, the propaganda, the diplomatic support, and you can set a fire that will burn maybe forever. However, just in the last week or so, the BBC, presumably with state approval, as the BBC is the British state broadcaster, released video from both Syria and Libya, which showed the presence of British special forces. And not your mythical SAS man with his face covered and living up a tree, but tanks and armored personnel carriers and new weapons. In the case of Libya, new grenade launching weapons that fire grenades which explode in the air above the target so that none of the explosion is soaked up by the ground. All of it is absorbed by the people over whose heads it is fired. Now they say that they're there to fight ISIS, but of course they're not. They might be prepared to fight the ISIS in the 1 square mile you talked about in Sirte, but they're definitely not going to fight the ISIS in ties and suits because they're there to defend them and protect them. And in the case of Syria, the British special forces, and I presume the special forces of all the Western countries are in there, are not fighting ISIS, but fighting on the side of people exactly like ISIS, and with the goal of regime change, as we know in Syria. So it's true that there is no large-scale invasion, and probably will never be. But that doesn't mean we're not intervening. The West is heavily intervened in Lebanon, in Syria, and in Libya. In fact, if it were not for the Western intervention, both Libya and Syria would be single sovereign states now. Do you want to come back on that, or shall I pass the microphone?
What I can say actually, George, about Libya, it's become an open plan laboratory for their weapons, especially with the ISIS in 1 mile, is a very controlled space to try their new weapon, new tactic. You know that those kind of minor special forces who go in Libya from most of the Western government, they are not seeking a political approval from their peoples to go there, because actually they are there. They are secretly, they are there. They, in a general term, when they being cornered, what they say that just for reporter, They are just to give us the real information on the grounds. But also, they are fighting. Another actually main things in Libya, we have it rather than Syria than others, we actually have oil and gas. And that's the other problems for Libyans. Historically, Libya is not a single colony country. When the Second World War ended, Libya was divided between France in the south, Italy in the north west, and Britain in the northeast. And when the oil come over, they give the privilege to United States to have many bases, air bases in Tripoli by approval from United Kingdom. When the Gaddafi came out to the power, they kick all them out. And even he bring the oil, nationalized the oil company. But when he nationalized the oil company, he just kicked two most dominated companies working in Libya, where happened to be BP, which is a British oil company, and the other American taxes. The Gaddafi doesn't swallow, or the Libyan people doesn't swallow the oil. They need to work in it. So they give it out, the contracts, to the European company. Eni Gas in Italy, Wintershall Germany, Shell Holland, France, with the big share to the Libyan people. So it's different, the shares. Now after the Gaddafi is finished out, those oil companies, they need to go back to their wealth and their shares in Libya. And who's against them? Not the ordinary Libyan people, because they are actually out of weapon, out of anything. The European oil company who are having a contract for long term from the Libyan company. So the war in Libya is actually between those 5 countries, despite they are look united in Syria, look like united in Security Council, United Nations, but in fact in Libya they are, each one have each own group, and they're still fighting, and we can see what they doing, the French military working with the General Haftar in East, British working with the militia.
It's an alphabet soup. Yeah. We're going to have to continue making our way through that soup in the next segment after this. You're watching كلمة with me, George Galloway, on Al Mayadeen Television, coming to you from London, discussing Libya 5 years on. How did it all work out? Earlier, we took the Al Mayadeen camera onto the streets of London to see what the public thought. Take a look at this.
Years after Gaddafi, is Libya better off?
I would say no.
Probably not.
Really can't say. I haven't seen too much in it lately, to be honest, but the place is still in a total sense of flux. There's more people leaving it now than there ever was before, so probably not.
Who is responsible for the growth of ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Libya?
ISIS, I would say. Rather, I don't see it's caused by anybody else. It may have been able to be better managed, but I don't see it. I don't think you can blame the intervention by the West or indeed by others.
As much as I hate to say it, it's probably the influence of Western democracy. We decide to remove a dictator to try and put in our own forces, and unfortunately in this case we had nothing to replace the dictatorship that was there, and the power vacuum is probably where ISIS, etc. have risen from.
I think partly the West and the policies of the Obama administration, and partly ISIS itself. They were very effective with social media and other forms of electronic communication. So I'd say that helped them a lot.
I think the West, mostly America, would be the major problem. I know Gaddafi wasn't a particularly nice person, but I think things were much more stable under him, and let the people deal with it rather than us get involved, which is causes problem today.
Well, quite a lot of good sense there, I thought, from the British public. What did you think?
طبعا في ما حدث في ليبيا خلال 5 سنوات الماضية وآخرها يعني تنظيم داعش الإرهابي خلال السنتين أو ال3 سنوات الماضية، وجرب الشعب الليبي كل 4 حكومات، ولا يوجد حل إلى هذه اللحظة، وكل ذلك يعني بتدخل الغرب ودعمهم للميليشيات ودعمهم لأحزاب معينة والإخوان المسلمين من جهة. لماذا لا يكف الغرب يده عن ليبيا ويجعل الحل ليبي باعتبار الشعب الليبي عانى خلال 5 سنوات من تهجير ومن عزل سياسي ومن ظروف معيشية سيئة. فالطلب الشعب الليبي هو أن يكف الغرب عن يده عن الدعم لهذه الميليشيات وهذه الأحزاب حتى يكون الحل ليبي وداخل ليبيا.
No one would dispute, and I certainly didn't in my introduction, the pernicious role of Western countries in the destruction of Libya. But why are the Libyans so ready to fight and kill each other? Why is it the case that we have single towns who have their own militia and their own claim on power? What is it about Libyans that makes them ready to, first of all, wish for and call for Western countries to attack their own country, and then once the Western country has destroyed the power in their own country, they are ready to slaughter each other in large numbers? Are you Libyan?
Yes.
Please give us some sense of how that state of affairs exists. Is there in effect no Libya really? No Libyan? That the people are from Benghazi or from Tripoli or Zintan or all the other towns and tribes that are involved in this conflict. Please take the microphone and you can answer in Arabic. Fine.
الليبيين يقتلوا في بعض ليس يعني قبل 2011 الليبيين كانوا يتعايشوا مع بعض يعني، ولكن بعد 2011 دول الغرب أصبحت تدعم في الأقليات أو في بعض القبائل ضد قبائل معينة، وكل صراع سياسي وصراع على النفط وصراع على المال يعني وصراع على الحكم بصفة عامة يعني. وذلك يعني أثبت ذلك بإرسال السلاح لهذه المجموعات، وآخرها يعني سفينة إيطالية قبل 2 أو 3 أرسلت عدد كبير من الأسلحة عن طريق سفينة أمريكية عن طريق إيطاليا إلى ميناء مصراتة. فهو صراع حكم يعني وصراع سياسة.
I get that, but who can assist me with this question? You see, there are civil wars everywhere, in every country, in every continent. It's not an Arab thing, certainly not just a Libyan thing. But usually the divisions are either sectarian or secular, nationalist versus Islamist, or left versus right. But in Libya, there's no sectarianism because there is no religious minority to speak of. Everyone's the same religion, the same sect. There's no left and right. There's no conflict between Islamism and nationalism. What there seems to be is a Balkanized country where towns and tribes fight each other. It all seems, forgive me saying so, it all seems very primitive. Do you share that analysis?
In some sort, yes, we are tribes and region, but we are only 6 million. Do you know the average family members in Libya is actually 5, father and mother, and with the 5 kids. So the whole population of Libya is 6 million. When you divide that, you find that it's just over a 1 million family. So all those families, they are connected to each other. So we are so connected as a Libyan. You can, when you go, anybody from any Libyan town or city, when he pay visit to any other city, with the first guy he met in the street, if he exchange the information, the family information, they will find the link straight away, out of a blue. That's how so closed. But also we have a tribals and a new, what I can say, tribal supports. If one guy from your tribe take the left side, usually you take with him left side, despite what you have in your mind, firstly. Then these kind of things, they actually matured for another things. When the money come over, when the power is going come over as well, when they seems to them they are controlling town and city. They are not controlling really, but because the wisdom peoples and the ordinary Libyan, they let them do what they would like to do because they don't like to add more bloodshed. That's the...
Interesting, very interesting. Who else would like to make a contribution? What about the young man in the front? How do you see the Libyan situation? Who do you blame for the chaos in Libya?
Right. My name's Mike. Basically, what I've got to say, I think everyone's right to point fingers at the Western world for what's happened, but there's also the role of places like Saudi Arabia and their sort of funding that's gone towards like how ISIS has come about, and I just want to know what you think about that.
There's no doubt that Saudi Arabia is the financial and theological, ideological fountainhead of extremism in not just the Arab world, but the Muslim world and amongst the Muslims in the rest of the world. The Saudi role has been a very profound one, and no one has held them to account for that. On the contrary, the Saudi dictatorship is still our best friend. We sell them anything that we can persuade them to buy, even if they can't use it. And if they can't use it, we'll help them to use it, as we're doing now in Yemen. So we sell them all these weapons. They can't really use them. So we'll send them the expertise to help them to use these weapons. But it's not just Saudi Arabia that is involved in Libya. In fact, there are several other countries from the Gulf who are even more deeply involved than Saudi Arabia in the last 5 years. Would it be right to say, Doctor, that all of these militias have a patron? That patron is one state or another, and very large sums of money. I mean, if I think of Qatar, for example, very, very large sums of money have been spent by Qatar on mayhem and murder in Libya. Yet we're very good friends with them. In fact, we gave them the World Cup in quite surprising circumstances. So it's obvious that it isn't just the Libyans, and it isn't even just the West directly. Only 6 million people. Everyone has a finger in this pie of 6 million people. And they're not even earning from it. Because as we've just heard, how many billions did Libya lose, did you say?
It's 200 billion.
200 billion pounds among 6 million people. You can do the maths. Was lost. So those who thought that they were destroying Libya in order to fill their own pockets, so far they, just like Iraq actually, with the exception of the American military-industrial complex companies, nobody really made a profit from it because the security situation that they have left in the wake of their interventions is so catastrophic that no businessman, I mean, if you were a businessman and I said to you today, I'm promoting you, you're now our manager in Libya, and I want you to pack and fly to Libya tomorrow, you definitely wouldn't go. Your wife wouldn't let you go. Your mother wouldn't let you go. So this is the point I'm making about lifting the huge stone and dropping it on our own feet. How about you, sir? Would you like to?
Well, really like these discussions, but the thing is, mostly for myself, I'm looking for solutions, like for everything, not just here and about Libya. My question is, when there is oil in one country, that oil is for just the government or the people as well? Like, if they sell the oil, where the money is going? Like, is it going straight to the government's pocket, or it's for the people as well?
Well, it's different in all countries, of course, and in the case of Libya, it isn't selling any oil because the complete chaos and breakdown in the country means that nothing is actually being produced in Libya, and $200 billion worth of revenues has been lost. But in the case of Saudi Arabia, for example, the oil is sovereign property. That means it belongs to the king and the Al Saud family, 30,000 male members of the Al Saud family who divide it amongst themselves. Some of it they spend on developing the country, though not very much. In my own film that's now on release, The Killings of Tony Blair, Prince Bandar, a very high Saudi prince, says on TV, and it's in our film, if you're saying that out of 400 billion that we spent in this country, that we corruptly stole 50 billion of it, I'll take that any time, he said. In other words, he said, so what? These thieves have stolen an undreamt of mountain of money from their own people. And in the case of Saudi Arabia, its next door neighbor, imagine, Yemen, is one of the poorest countries in the entire world, living next door to the richest country in the entire world, whilst praying 5 times a day and claiming to be Muslims. Imagine, your next door neighbor is starving and you think God is going to accept your prayers when you are filthy rich and you don't even help the poor people next door. In fact, worse than that, you attack them and kill their children. Well, look, I think we are slightly straying from the path, but all these issues are related. You're right. Who gets the wealth? Who got the wealth? Libya was one of the countries that distributed the wealth a bit more fairly than other countries, though in my opinion, absolutely chaotically and in an unplanned way, which left Libya much weaker as a state than it needed to be. Most of the other oil-producing Arab countries are ruled by thieves who not only steal their people's wealth, but agree with the West, who keep them in power, that they will deposit this stolen wealth in the West, spend it on Western weapons, on Western stocks and shares, Western property, gamble it in Western casinos, spend it in Western bordellos, on all kinds of sins. It's a Faustian pact that these thieves make with the Western countries that keep them in power. There'll be more right after this. You're watching كلمة with me, George Galloway, on Al Mayadeen Television, coming to you from London, discussing Libya with an audience of distinguished experts and enthusiastic amateurs like me. We took the كلمة camera onto the streets of London to ask the people what they thought of Libya 5 years on. Take a look at this.
Who's paying the price of Western Europe intervention in Libya?
Well, Libya mostly, but then there are side effects for Europe with the mass migration that's happened, where people understandably want to leave those countries.
That's an interesting way of perceiving it. I think you could say that they're gaining the benefit partly. I mean, yes, it's a problem, and maybe it could have been better managed, but it might have been worse without the intervention.
I think we all are. I mean, it's not just about the people who are, experiencing the problems in that country, but it's a world problem, isn't it?
Who's paying the price? Definitely the Libyan people, definitely the reputation of Islam, and certainly the Obama administration. I mean, they have suffered because of their policy there.
How can the terrorist genie be put back in the bottle?
If I had that answer, I'd probably be the head of parliament at this point, wouldn't I? How can it? I generally don't know. I have no answer to that.
I think it's a long haul. It needs cultural change. It needs approaching people. It needs it's the same sort of problem we face in Britain in a much more mild fashion. People disengage with politics and needing to be brought on board, and the people, whether it's Muslims or others in the world, feeling that they're part of the way the world is going and can influence the power structures.
I think that fellow with the bad wig must have just wandered out of the British Foreign Office, because he's the only person in all those vox pops who's clinging fast to the prevailing narrative that Libya would have been worse if we hadn't intervened. This is what some people still say about Iraq, but not very many. And he's the first person I have ever heard say it about Libya. Because whatever else you say about Gaddafi, and as I say, I was never, ever his supporter, the idea that Libya is better today than it was before is simply laughable. And as I said earlier, if you don't laugh, you probably would have to cry. So the country has been destroyed. Tribalism, city-state loyalty, militia of all kinds, having only one thing in common: they'll cut your throat if you are not part of their gang. The end, effectively, though my Libyan friends are reluctant to accept it, of anything called Libyan nationality or nationalism, the collapse of the state into probably permanently warring militias. The young man in the front row asked me before the break what the solution was. And he'll have noticed, if you didn't, that I didn't give him an answer. And that's because I don't have one. Something, some force, some leader is going to have to emerge in Libya that can unite people who are currently tearing each other to pieces. In my opinion, with all respect, that's unlikely to be a revival of the old regime. Just as in Iraq, it's not going to be a re-emergence of the Ba'ath Party that ruled before the Western invasion. Something new, something which unites people across tribe, across city, across narrow differences of doctrine, some sense of nationalism. If not Arab nationalism, then at least Libyan nationalism is going to have to emerge. That's how it looks to me. The young lady in the middle.
Hi, I wanted to ask, what do you think is the prime reason for the West to intervene into Libya? Is it because they want to weaken the axis of resistance, for example, Iran, Syria? I mean, is there a link between that?
It's a very interesting question, and again, I risk offending some in the audience. I really don't know why the West turned against Gaddafi, because he was giving them everything. He was dancing with Tony Blair. He was giving the Western banks and people like Blair anything that they wanted. One of Gaddafi's men once said to me, one of his top men once said to me in Rabat, he said, "We have always supported you." I said, "Let me stop you." Sure that the hotel suite was being bugged. I said, "Let me stop you. You have never supported me. And if you had supported me, you would already have given Tony Blair all the details." Because that's the kind of level of collaboration that the Gaddafi regime was having with the West in those last few years. So why did they turn on him? I really don't know. Saif al-Islam al-Gaddafi, the son, who was based in London much of the time, was best friends with Tony Blair and Peter Mandelson and other leaders of the war party in Britain. So it's a good lesson, actually, to other Arab dictators. A very good lesson. You may think that these people are your friends, but when the time comes, when it suits them to drop you and desert you to your fate, which in the case of Gaddafi was a shocking and disgraceful fate, they'll do it. Don't think these people are your friends. They are your friends for what they can take from you. You know the old saying, a friend in need is a nuisance. A friend in need is someone you turn your back on. That's the mentality of the Western leaders. I don't know why they turned against Gaddafi, especially as it was abundantly clear that the people that they were supporting who were trying to overthrow him were exactly the kind of people that we're supposedly afraid of elsewhere. I used to watch Sky News at night during the so-called Libyan revolution as these pickup trucks filled with long-bearded, heavily armed, bloodthirsty fanatics were hurtling along the highway with a Sky News pickup racing alongside them. And the newsreader, the journalist, breathlessly talking about them as freedom fighters. I used to scream at the TV, what part of what these people are saying and shouting do you not understand? Why can't you see? These are exactly the kind of people. We've just invaded and occupied Afghanistan to fight. These are exactly the kind of people that you're telling us are an existential danger to us everywhere. So, if you ask me, choose between Gaddafi or Al-Qaeda, I choose Gaddafi. Only a madman would not when you see what is Al-Qaeda. But the West chose Al-Qaeda. And they laughed at Gaddafi when he said, if I'm overthrown, it will be Al-Qaeda who will come to power here. They laughed. But it was right. Who else? Gentleman at the back.
Hi, George. Just from an average Joe Blog civilian point of view, we see what we're seeing, Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan. What can we do as individuals to actually put a stance on this and actually speak up, as opposed to just going onto the social media networks and tweeting about it and putting a status? So what more can we do?
Well, I think we shouldn't underestimate the power of the new media that we have, because that power to inform is such that ignorance is now a choice. Ignorance is a choice that people make. There's no need at all for anybody to be ignorant about any of this, because we have the tools now with the new media to find the truth, to compare the facts, to weigh up the arguments. And we don't need Rupert Murdoch or the BBC or anyone else's permission. We can go around them and find the truth. And when we find it, we must share it. I have, as you may know, over 1 million followers on social media. And whilst I can't fight every battle, every war, every day of the week, I have to make priorities and choices. The 1 million people that are following me are not in any doubt about the basic story that we are discussing here tonight and every other edition of this show. And every one of those 1 million has their own followers and their own friends, and they can disseminate that information and rally. Beyond that, of course, we can hold our own government to account. We had no parliamentary discussion, let alone a parliamentary vote, to send British soldiers to Libya. The government released the news through its tame state broadcaster, the BBC, at the height of summer, when Parliament isn't sitting and there are no MPs to ask any questions about it. Even if the MPs who might ask a question had any time to do so, because they have been pitched into an all-consuming internal Labour Party battle over who should be the Labour leader. So even if Parliament were sitting, that might not have happened. Now, this is the British government showing contempt for the British people, knowing that millions of us would be quite angry, actually, to discover that our taxes, our armed forces, our weapons are now on the ground, British boots on the ground in Libya and in Syria. The videos were released more or less simultaneously. This should make us angry at our own government. And because we live in a kind of democracy, I'll put it no higher than that, we have a right to demand of our representatives, what's going on here? Why aren't you raising questions about this? What good can come from British soldiers reinvading Libya? We heard from the doctor earlier that at the end of World War II, the British were in control of one part, the Italians another, and the French another. Well, actually, all three are now back. All three European colonizing countries are now back in Libya. So the last 70 years have been wasted in a way. And Libya's in the same situation it was back then. Broke, producing no oil, occupied by foreigners, with the dirty work largely being done by local Libyan militias. And we have to win a commitment to end our role as colonizers, as an imperial power. When people ask you, well, what should we have done about Gaddafi? You should answer, it's none of our business. Gaddafi is the business of the Libyans, not you. Nobody gave you, least of all God gave you, a duty or a responsibility to be invading Libya to change its government. We have to win that argument ideologically, and we've not yet won it, I suspect. Who else? Yes, the young lady at the front, please.
Hi, George. I was wondering, with this situation, how do you think it's going to affect the youth of Libya and even the youth of now in this country and the countries in Europe because of the backlash of what will happen?
Well, it's a good question. I don't have detailed knowledge about it, but life must be hell for everybody in Libya, and young people in Libya must be looking forward to a future with no hope. In the past, I alluded to it earlier, I believe, some will disagree, I believe Libya completely failed to state build. Instead of using all that oil wealth to build a public realm in Libya with state-of-the-art universities, state-of-the-art hospitals, state-of-the-art facilities, the Libyan system gave people money, very generously. If you were a young person in Libya in the old days and you were going to be married, you would go to the local office and say, we're going to be married, and somebody would open a drawer and give you a lot of money. And that's something, certainly more than they've got now. But it would have been far better to have used that money to build the Libyan state, Libyan institutions. But now the Libyan young people don't have either of those two things. They don't have the institutions, they don't have a future to look forward to, and nobody, definitely nobody, is opening a drawer and giving them money. That's why Libyan students were everywhere in the world, very generously supported by the Libyan government. They were sent to study everywhere. I myself have met hundreds of them over decades. They should have been at university in Libya, but at least they were being sent to universities abroad. Now there's nobody sending them to universities anywhere. So the situation for Libyan young people is bleak, and maybe, God willing, that will produce a new political leadership in Libya that will say, enough of this. I'll let you back in to answer, as I knew you would, after this. You're watching كلمة with me, George Galloway, for Al Mayadeen Television, coming to you from London, but discussing Libya. 5 years ago, these geniuses, these James Bonds who run Western countries, thought it was a good idea to become Al-Qaeda's air force, destroy Libya, and put in power, who knows? Certainly not one person, certainly not one government. There's now several Libyas. Humpty Dumpty was pushed off the wall, and all the king's horses and all the king's men will be very lucky indeed if they can put Humpty Dumpty together again. At least that's my point of view, but I want to hear yours. Doctor, please.
The only actually good learner is actually the history. Let's take the audience to the history of Libya. When the Italian invaded us, 1911, our grandfathers, ancestors, they formed their resistance. There was no oil, there was nothing. They imported the tanks, Italian, with the highly sophisticated weapon at that time, and our families only in the camel and horses, and we defeat them. After we did many fights, grounds all over all Libya, and we have grandsons. Proudly, their names, they are still in our history book. That time, they don't know, our ancestors, that we will kick out the Italian from our country 1970, after almost 60 years. They don't know that in 2006, we bring the Prime Minister of Italy to apologize for all those things they did in the past. So from that lessons, we know that we are in 2011, they came back, but we have trust, we have faith in ourselves and our children to bring our country back and to restore our country and our differences and will go out from this dark tunnel.
Bravo, that's a very beautiful speech, and I agree with every word of it. Let me just press you on it. Are there any signs already of the beginning of a new Libyan resistance, a pan-Libyan resistance to the disintegration of the country and the foreign reoccupation? And what does that look like, and when will the international audience begin to glimpse it?
Actually, we feel it. Right now, we feel it. The first, by the knowledge, by the knowing what's going on. Now, in all Libya, despite their differences, political or whatever their side, that side or this side, tribal or any political side, they know that all these things happen in Libya, being staged, and not for the sake of Libyan, but for the sake of others who are locally, either neighborhood countries or far like Qatar, UAE, Emirat, Turkey, all other things, or even for the Western governments. By this knowledge, we based some sort of resistance among the tribals. They come over. There is a local internal dialogue. It's not much on the Western media, no, because they are banned from there. They are talking among each other. They're solving their problems, even between their armed militia. Some of the armed militia leaders, they know what's going on, because now they know 5 years, nothing. Other things, when you compare, let me answer, comment on your comment previously. The previous regime is actually, it's built the made-man river, the great man-made river. Type it into Google, you search it.
Oh, I know it, but it never actually worked, did it?
No, it's working. People now drinking from it in Tripoli, in Benghazi, and every city. Yes, there is a sort of a dictatorship. There is problems in how to manipulate a democracy around exchange the power. But on the other hand, there's plenty of good things for the Libyans. Actually, the Libyans know it now, because now there's no oil, even the oil illegally selling to the Malta and the mafia of the oil who are shipping around in the Mediterranean. The locals, and they search around, you found where is the port of who's selling the oil and also transporting the illegal immigration from their port. On the same side, the same person who is responsible, one called العمرية, which is in Sabrata city, and a very powerful militiaman. The same one who is responsible about the illegal immigration from Libya to Italy, actually signing a contract with Enigas to protect their compound in the coast. The same person. So you see how's the scale. This kind of things, this kind of knowledge, actually, they know it in the locals. So that's why the people are coming together, defeating the armed militia, defeating those Western intervention. And when you see the Twitter and from any ambassadors, from those Western ambassadors who are meeting with the Libyan central bank managers, and you see the laugh, the comment, and the social media from the ordinary Libyans, you know how we are strong in our resistance. Not far, but we are starting the 1,000-mile route.
Well, of course, that fills me with joy, the thought of it. If Libya has lost $200 billion in 5 years, by crude maths, and oil prices are very low now, there have been times when they were very high, this means that over 40 years, Libya had oil revenues of $2 trillion by my crude mathematics. And you told us that Libya had 6 million people. 6 million people into $2 trillion, that should go a very long way. every Libyan should have been a rich man. And every town and city in Libya should have looked like Dubai. But neither of those things is true. So, with the greatest of respect to you, and with, I hope, a conciliatory heart, one of the reasons we're in this mess is that Libya did not build a state, institutions, and national loyalty. Now, even if you had, you might still have been destroyed. I accept that. Iraq did have that, and it was still destroyed. But you would have been in a much stronger position if the $2 trillion shared among 6 million people had been spent. Your country used to call itself socialist. If it had been spent in a socialist way, building state things that everybody felt a part of. I'm much less concerned about the democracy. You know, we have democracy, but we don't actually have a share of anything. What is more important even than democracy is that the people feel that they have a share in something that is real, that you can touch, you can study in, you can be treated in, you can enjoy and grow and develop from. So we need to be self-critical, I believe. Otherwise, no one will listen to us when we say what the way forward is. And you have just brilliantly pointed the way forward. That's the path that I hope the Libyan people can find. Who's going to, we're coming nearly an end. Yes, go ahead, sir.
Basically, I'm hoping someone in the audience can confirm this for me. I got this, my source is the word of mouth of a banker, and they told me that...
That's always a dubious source.
Basically, she told me that at the time when Gaddafi was taken out of power, he was in the process of making a new currency that was going to be not in the best interest of the West, and that was one of the reasons that the West hated Gaddafi, basically. I was just hoping for confirmation. Yeah.
I wish that were true.
Golden African dinar.
Yeah. I do hear this. Of course, people who support Gaddafi often pray it in aid. I don't myself consider it a significant point. Gentleman at the back.
George, I know the $2 trillion figure is just one that you've made up in the head.
Well, I just did a crude multiplication of 200 billion over 5 years.
Where do you think the Libyan wealth is now sat?
Well, Libya had a sovereign wealth fund of 100 billion when Gaddafi was overthrown. $500 million of it was in JP Morgan, and billions more would be in other Western banks. Where the rest of it is, I don't know, and more importantly, neither do the Libyans. France indicated, because we know from WikiLeaks, France indicated through cables to the United States that they wanted to take charge of Libya's gold and silver bullion. No wonder, who wouldn't? What happened to it? How did Sarkozy have so much money to spend in his presidential election? Libya, in quite a long period of time, supported many revolutions, supported poorer African countries to a very, very significant extent. Whether the value of that money was ever realized is, of course, a much more debatable issue. But I have been in Libya more than once, and I know that it didn't look like Dubai. Not even the capital, never mind the other towns and cities. Every Libyan was quite wealthy by comparison to Africa, very wealthy indeed. By comparison with many Arab countries, very wealthy indeed, but in cash. And cash is here today and gone tomorrow. And now there is nothing to show for it. If I'm right about 2 trillion, by the way, I'm pretty sure I have underestimated it considerably, because these figures are over the last 5 years when oil prices have been low. There have been times when oil has been more than twice the cost that it is today. It's $46 today for Brent crude. It has been 117, maybe more than that even. So a lot of money went astray. I don't think myself that Gaddafi was personally corrupt. He didn't go anywhere. He didn't need any money. He lived actually, quite famously, quite a traditional life in a tent and so on. I believe that at least Saif al-Islam al-Gaddafi was deeply corrupt. I believe he corrupted other people whose names I can't mention on the television. And no good came of it. Libya didn't benefit from it. And now Saif is in a prison cell, minus 2 of his fingers, some of his teeth, and all of the people that he corrupted have turned their back on him and don't want to know him. So it's a sorry state of affairs. But I repeat my opening comments. Give me Gaddafi any day over what we have now. Give me Saddam Hussein any day over what we have now. Give me al-Assad over ISIS and al-Qaeda any day. That doesn't mean I liked any of them. Doesn't mean I would have voted for any of them. It just means that they were better than what they have been replaced by. In the Libyan case, to a very huge extent, because for 40 years, there was something called Libya. There was a country called Libya, a state called Libya, an idea called Libya, and now there is nothing. One of the reasons why we have a shortage of people asking for the microphone is because of the scale of this disaster and the lack of any idea of how we're going to get out of this. I have no answer, and it's not my business to answer anyway. So I want to follow the line of our Libyan guest, that the young people in Libya study their history. Study the history of Omar Mukhtar and the great revolt against Italian colonialism. Study the best bits, which I believe the early bits of the Gaddafi era, and put aside tribalism and allegiance to towns and so on. This is childish nonsense in 2016. Develop a national consciousness. Develop a new Libyan nationalism. Think of Omar Mukhtar. Act like Omar Mukhtar. And kick these colonialists out all over again. I've been George Galloway. This has been Kalima Horra on Al Mayadeen Television. Thank you for watching.